Welcome to Taxpayer Alert. I'm Al Segala, President of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, which sponsors this event. And our special guest at this session is Rebecca Callen, our county Auditor Controller. Rebecca, tell us a little bit about what you do and what you like about being an Auditor Controller.
Okay, well, my name is Rebecca Callen. I took office in January of 2011. It's a 4-year term. I really love my office. I like to give to my county. I've been here since I was 4 years old, so it's home to me. And it's important that I am knowledgeable about where our taxpayers are going, our taxpayer dollars are going. So I'm there to ensure that we're adhering to board policy, state controller rules and requirements, as well as legislative action. And so whether that be the Budget Act or uses of restricted funds, that's what I'm there for.
Well, Rebecca, I've been in the Board of Supervisors meetings quite often over the last 5 years, and I really admire your work. You do a good job. And also, you don't seem to react emotionally like everybody else does in the room. You seem to keep a cool head and you just talk the numbers.
It's just a job. It's my job, and I am passionate about it, but I don't really do anything shooting from the hip. Every decision that I make is vetted, and I ensure that I have policy behind me, I have legal opinion behind me, I have legislative action behind me, and as long as we follow the rules, which are pretty well defined, then everything goes smoothly. It's just that what occurs in larger organizations is that people get used to doing things the way that they've always done them. And as you well know, laws change on a regular basis. So it's important that we are on an annual basis at least evaluating that and making sure that we're modifying our procedures and policies accordingly.
Well, our Taxpayer Association really appreciates what you're doing.
Thank you.
And also, I think you've been a speaker several times at our public meetings and luncheons.
I have. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, let's ask some questions about things that are coming up.
Okay.
How will your department benefit from the new computer program?
Well, we're still in discussion on that. It's the property tax system, which involves the assessor's office, the treasurer tax collector, and the auditor controller's office. And it's a huge endeavor. We know that it's very expensive, whether it's the software cost or staffing cost to implement that software. So we're certainly not taking it lightly, and we're still in full discussion. But the bottom line is it would greatly benefit not only my department, but the other departments out there, as well as the county and the taxpayers. Now, whether that ends up happening this year, next year, or several years from now, we're still looking at that. We definitely heard the board, and we definitely are aware of how much that program would cost. And so we're not taking it lightly at all. And we're really evaluating if this is the best time to make that type of move, or if we should hold back and look at other possibilities, or investing our time in a different way, or just waiting for other possibilities. So we're still in discussion on that, but definitely anything that we're doing, it's always to the benefit of our department and for the taxpayers. And that's how we consider whether we move forward or not.
What is the budget outlook for our county?
Well, I wasn't overly thrilled with how recommended budget went, and I think my concern is that we don't have revenues to sustain our operations right now. And I made that very clear when I spoke at budget hearings, that I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that we do not have revenues equal to our expenditures. And I feel that the budget really should be defined off of revenue. So you should have revenue first, and then you build your expenditure budget off of those revenues. And instead, what we've done is we're using one-time funds to pay for ongoing operations. Well, you know what happens to one-time funds. You spend them one time and they're gone. So as an example for the recommended budget, I went through looking at where we're pulling some one-time funds. One of the largest sources of one-time funds that we are utilizing in the recommended budget is Teeter. Teeter is a program that was implemented in the county several years ago. And it's it's part of the property tax apportionment process where we go ahead and front the tax dollars to the jurisdictions regardless of collection. And at the point that those tax dollars are collected, the county gets the penalties and interest. So it's the penalties and interest on the delinquent secured taxes that is teeter. So as the years have gone on, we have accumulated quite a large amount of teeter funds, which is penalties and interest. And that historically was there to advance our technology. So whether that was new IT projects or replacement of very expensive hardware, software, as you know, everyone's trying to go paperless, everything is on a computer, and so we were investing in that. But as time's gone on, because our revenue has been diminishing, we've been relying on teeter, which is those penalties and proceeds, penalties and interest, to fund our ongoing costs. Everything from staffing to ongoing maintenance contracts to just holes in our revenue. And we can only do that for so long. So for the recommended budget, I came up with, there's just over $3 million that we're utilizing of teeter. That's $3 million of ongoing expenses that we don't have the money to pay for, other than one-time funds. So once we go through teeter, there is nothing left. That's why the CAO really tried to push the fact that we have a gap between revenue and expenditures, and that gap is growing. So we know how much our expenditures are going to be increasing. So we know the cost of living adjustments that are going to be made as part of salaries and benefits. We know that our regular contracts for services are probably tied to a particular CPI, and that's probably going to be about 2% increase. So we know those expenses are going to increase. What we don't know is the revenue. And the revenue that we're seeing is not increasing at that level, at a 2% or a 4% increase level. And we have very little control locally over revenues. We get 1% of sales tax. We get just under 18 cents per dollar of property tax. And we receive some permitting fees, some business property taxes, some business license fees, and there's some other fines and fees that we receive in there. But we don't have a lot of control over that. And we don't see, at least I don't see, and those of us that are really sitting at the table trying to figure this out, we don't see logistically or reasonably where we're going to see large growths of revenue. And so from just a reasonable perspective, there's two options. You either figure out how to generate revenue or you have to cut costs. And I don't really see logistically how we're not going to cut costs.
You know, this is very, very important to the taxpayer. Today, we have a major city in the United States, Detroit, go bankrupt. I understand they went bankrupt by being 30% in the red. In other words, they spent 30% more than the revenue they took in. And they're appealing to the federal government. This is kind of interesting. The federal government is 40% in the red, but they can print money. And there's something wrong with that picture. But the most important thing for our local taxpayers is what's happening to us. We don't want to go the way that Stockton went and so many other communities. And that's why we really appreciate you being on top of this and sharing this information with the public, because the public can talk to their Board of Supervisors. And if they don't, we could end up in a situation similar to those other communities.
We could, and if we don't make some decisions pretty soon, eventually we will run out of all the one-time funding, and then we're going to be forced to making some pretty excruciating cuts, and I think that's unfortunate. You know, I do urge everyone to reach out to their Board of Supervisors. I think where I see the biggest issue is that everyone wants the services that they want. You want to be able to pick up the phone and have that sheriff deputy show up at your home. You want to be able to get that health inspector to that restaurant that you're trying to open immediately. You want to have your home inspected when you're trying to get a notice of completion done. All these things, you want a library to go to. You want to be able to call animal control when there's a fox that's pestering your animals. And we want those services. We just can't afford all of them. And so part of this is that as taxpayers, we have to understand that we we didn't move here to be in a suburban area. We didn't move here to be in a metropolitan area. And there's pros and cons of living here. And one of the cons is we're very rural. We're not going to have the same luxuries that you would have if you were living in Sacramento or a more metropolitan area. You're just not. You're going to have longer waits and longer times to get things done, just because we don't generate the type of revenue in order to pay for that really quick service. So I think part of it is us being responsive to the fact that we have to live within our means, and part of that is going to mean that there might be longer waits, or we might not have all the services that you had when you moved up here from, San Diego. But we have beautiful natural resources up here, and we have a really great community. So that's the pro.
Yeah, life is good and people are great.
Exactly.
But there's something that the taxpayers are concerned about, is that there's an unfunded liability that gets developed on CalPERS when they don't receive as much as they anticipate on their investment money. Then they go back to the county employers to make up the difference.
Yes.
And sometimes this can bankrupt a community or a county or a city. How do we stand in that area?
We're actually in a really good position. One of the things that the prior board was looking at was switching over to CalPERS for health insurance. From face value, that seemed like a really good idea. But when you really looked into it, it was going to create an enormous unfunded liability. The unfunded liability it was going to create for retiree health was actually going to be larger than our unfunded liability for our retirement. And I was absolutely against that. And I actually wrote a letter in to urge the board to please not do this. We have no right to be taking on additional unfunded liability. So I think it's really important that we look at the unfunded liabilities that we do have and figure out the best method to pay them down as we can. And we do look at that on a regular basis. So we are looking at the liabilities that we have at CalPERS, and if there are methods that we can do legally to refinance them or pay them down, and we have the funds to do that, then that's something that we're considering.
Oh, very good, Rebecca. The Taxpayer Association really supported you in that effort. Well, something that came up at one of our luncheons, we had a speaker talking about the TOT tax increase. That's transit occupancy tax, and they were going to increase it from 6% to 10%. And then they were going to take that extra money and divvy it up with 5 or 6 different organizations that would be exempt from scrutiny from the Board of Supervisors. And I think you and several other county officials that were at that meeting raised the question, is this really legal? And from then on, we haven't heard a peep from the supporters of this tax increase.
The last thing I saw was an article in December discussing it. And I think there's really good intentions of people that are trying to find ways of funding in a creative manner. But I think that we need to work together to figure out what's the best way of doing that. There's only one jurisdiction that I'm aware of that I've been able to locate in the state that has actually done something like this, and that was within the city of Oakland. But it still didn't completely absolve the city from all jurisdictional overview of that money. And that's something that you just really have to be careful with, because when a coalition starts, they all could be nonprofit, but what happens when a particular piece of that coalition dissolves? Where does that money go? So it's really important that it's laid out and that the framework is there and that there's checks and balances with that. And we also need to be clear that the whole purpose of TOT really was to help the jurisdiction with the strains of transient, with tourism. There's added stress on law enforcement. There's added stress on our roads. There's added stress on the county overall. And so that was a way to help fund those stresses. So in order to move completely away from that, I think we're kind of forgetting about what the basic need was for that TOT, which was for roads and law enforcement and the basic infrastructure for the county.
I think supporting the Visitors Bureau was part of that, to attract people to come to the county. And when they come to the county, they spend money. And when they spend money, then we get sales tax.
And that was, yes, and that was what the board did. That's when the board decided to give a third of that allocation to the Visitors Bureau. And they've been using that money to help with the tourism efforts here.
Oh, very good, Rebecca. Okay, now we have an item that's come up, not too much in the news, but it's very extensive. This is the new legislation. It's called SB1, and it has to do with sustainable communities. You've taken a glance at this. Could you explain a little bit what's happening there and what effect it's going to have in our community?
I have taken a look at it. I don't think it'll have much of an effect. We're one of the few counties in the state that had no redevelopment at all. And that was a thank goodness for me, because it's unfortunately caused many auditor controllers to lose hair or go gray. It was extremely problematic. And the thing that happens in California that doesn't necessarily happen in other states is that when redevelopment happens in California, that 1% of the property taxes is split between all of the varying jurisdictions, the school districts and the fire districts and the county and the road, everybody. When redevelopment comes in, redevelopment actually gets a portion of the 1%. In other states, when redevelopment comes in, they have to actually sell it to the voters to pay an additional amount on top of the 1%. In California, you don't do that. And so I think it would be I guess I would be shocked if we ever passed a redevelopment agency in our county. I've seen shocking things, but I guess I would be really shocked, because I think that you would have every jurisdiction in the boardroom saying no, because in essence what it means is a loss of their allocation. And no school district, no fire district, no cemetery or veterans district is going to agree to lower their percentage. So I don't see it impacting us. For sure, there's going to be other jurisdictions in other parts of the state that this is going to impact, but I don't necessarily see it being something that I see reasonably happening. But you never know. So it's something that we definitely should keep our eye out. But it's important that we know as taxpayers, when you're talking about redevelopment, in essence, you really are taking money away from your schools and your fire districts and all of your other jurisdictions.
Yeah, that's true. Also, there is a little bit of good news in that the state legislature looks like they're going to pass this law because they can do it with a majority vote, because they're not actually allocating funds. If they were, then they'd need 2/3 to pass. So it comes to the county. The state is not forcing the county to go into the system, but it's allowing it to do so. It's setting up a law so it could do so, so that it can increase taxes and regulations on its own citizens.
Right.
However, in order to do that, it goes back to Prop 13 again.
Yep.
They'll need a 2/3 vote, and they probably are not going to get that. At least as long as our Taxpayer Association is breathing our last breath, I don't think it'll happen.
No, I don't see it either.
So now the next, what changes would you like to see at the state level? What would be good?
What would really be good, and I did speak a little bit about this at the barbecue that I went to, and that is for the state to give the local agencies more control over the revenues that we're getting. Right now, what'll happen is the state will have mandates on the local jurisdictions, on the county, and there will be strings attached to all the revenue. And instead of us being able to know locally how best to allocate those dollars, we're required to fit those programs in the box that the state devised for us. Well, you know, Calaveras County is much different from Tuolumne, who's much different from Amador, who's much different from Sacramento. And I think that locally, we just need to have more control over the dollars that we have. It's our local taxpayers that are ultimately paying those tax dollars, whether it's through, whether it passes back through the feds back to us or the state back to us. But I would really like to see more local autonomy over those allocations.
That's a very good point, which kind of segues into the issue of receiving grants and other monies from higher levels of government, like the federal government and the state government, because they almost always come with strings attached, and they seem to also develop a dependency
Yes.
on having more money from this source. And then it just so happens that the state and the federal government are not in such great financial shape,
Right.
particularly the federal government.
Yeah.
And so how can a taxpayer communicate when the lure of this free money is there? How can we, what could we do or say that to convince our local representatives that we need to be careful about this?
And I completely agree. And this is actually an area where I'm going to be working with the administrative office to come up with some sort of procedure for grants. What I'm seeing is that people are getting desperate. We have departments that are getting desperate to try to keep their programs in play and to make sure that their staff is still there. And so they are looking at grants, and they're not necessarily looking at the long-term impacts of them. And they're not necessarily looking at the strings attached to them. And in some cases, a grant may end up costing us more than what it was worth, because the reporting or the what you have to spend it on is just not equal to what we need to have here locally. And so what I see happening is that departments are going after these grants that I might not even know anything about until we actually receive the money. And that's not good. And then we're also seeing where departments are spending money on grant applications and we're not getting them. And when you add all of that staff time up, I think it's taking control away from us to determine what's the best mode. You know, does it make more sense to, go after that grant, or does it make more sense to look at internally how we can do this? So I'm going to work with the administrative office to come actually with a kind of a grant procedure where we'll get it on the front end and we'll make determinations if it's an appropriate grant that we should be going after, who needs to be notified of that information, what level of reporting do we need to give to the board depending on size, and also maintaining better reporting on all of them so that we'll know exactly what grants are coming through our system and which ones we probably want to stay away from. So we definitely see that as being an area that could get us, and I for sure, it can sometimes be more expensive for us to get a grant that is misappropriated because you've spent the money that you've received and now you have to pay it back. So it ends up costing us double. And that's what we don't want to see. And that's kind of my big fear on some of these grants, because people are just going after them because they know that there's money on the table. But is it really the money that we want to go after? I don't think we can completely get away from grants. Unfortunately, that's government. And if we want to run certain programs and we want to have certain things here, that's, our options are either we raise taxes here locally, or we figure out another method of funding it, or we have to kind of jump through the hoops and get those grants.
So it's kind of like we need to seek moderation or balance in grants. One of the grants, or the source of the grants that the taxpayers are concerned about, is law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, it doesn't seem to have any negative effect, and it doesn't take away local control of our law enforcement. But in other cases, it could very well do that. Mm-hmm. And So we think that the county should prioritize its expenditures based on what government should do. Its most important things it should do. For instance, protecting the people is very important, and that would mean that our fire and police would be high priority. So they should be funded to the extent needed to have them fully operational. And so you don't have to wait a response time for an hour if you have a crime happen. And then, so it's a hard thing for public officials to do, because a lot of their friends are in some of the other departments that are not so critical.
Well, but it's also a balance, because we say that, but you don't want to close the library. And or you want to know that the restaurants that you're eating at are not going to make you ill, or that someone's working on the general plan. All these things are general funded. And so, yes, as much as we possibly can. I mean, and the board really has done that historically, where they have funded law enforcement and public safety as a whole. But I think part of the crux of the problem is, well, what does public safety really mean? Depending on who you talk to, public safety also means the district attorney. It also means probation.
Jail.
It also means the jail.
Yeah.
It also means public health. It also means part of environmental health. And so, what do we really mean by public safety? And part of public safety also is, parts of code compliance. It's part of the building inspectors. So, I mean, all of that kind of has to come out for discussion, and there's a balance that we have to do. But unfortunately, we just don't have the revenue to sustain. So already, we're $3 million overspending. So where do we cut $3 million? I mean, and we're talking about when the sheriff's department is over 30% of the budget, over 30% of the general fund budget. That, for everybody else that's on the table, it's a considerable amount that would have to cut. And my department, for instance, is one of those necessary evils. So is the treasurer tax collector, so is the assessor, so is the clerk recorder.
Well, they tried to cut the assessor,
yeah.
and it didn't work out too good.
So where do you cut?
Yeah.
And you kind of have to figure out where the best places are to cut. But it's a difficult decision, but we have to make sure that we understand how we all are kind of together on this.
Well, it seems that, that's very good points. There probably is a hierarchy on public safety. For instance, perhaps code compliance would not be as critical as your deputies. So if you're going to have a crisis of some kind, you want to be able to respond to protect the people. This would allow people to be more secure when they come here, and we want them to come here because it will be a secure place.
Yep.
One of the reasons people are leaving Stockton to come here is just that.
Yep.
Well, Rebecca, we really appreciate having you here
Thank
in
you.
our program, and we appreciate having you in our luncheons. You kept us so informed.
Good.
And well, one of the things that, as we close the program now, we'd like to say is that we totally appreciate not only the work you do, but the other elected officials that are hang so well together. You seem to work in harmony with each other, and this is very good for the taxpayer and very good for our county.
Good.
And now we're about ready to close the program. We want to thank our people that are watching for watching this program for the Taxpayers Alert. And I'm Al Segala, President of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, and we'll hope you join us again. Now remember our website, which is calaverastaxpayers.org, and we try to have information there that would be appealing to you.